We're going to be in Matthew chapter 8. We're going to look at verses 2 through 16. And let me just, by way of reminder, let me just go back to Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4 was the end of a section, and in that section, he gave a really quick, brief summary of what the next section was going to be about. So in Matthew 4, we're going to read just a little piece of it where he gives us this summary of Jesus going throughout Galilee and doing all of his healing. But then it's in chapters 8 and 9 where we are today, and in chapters 8 and 9, he goes into detail about 9 of these particular healings that he mentions back in chapter 4 as a summary. And so that's what we are going to get for the next 2 chapters, chapter 8 and chapter 9. We're going to have 3 groups of 3 miracles. Today we'll do the first group of 3 miracles, and we'll go from there. So let's go back. The title of today's sermon is So That the People May Rejoice, Part 2. And that's what we understand Matthew chapter 8 and 9 being, is a time of rejoicing for the area of Galilee, which we'll remember from last Sunday God had promised way back in Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, God had promised that He would bring rejoicing, renewal, and joy back to the area that was once destroyed and left dark and gloomy. So Matthew chapter 4, we're going to be in verse 23. Here's our summary. And he went throughout all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. And so his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all of the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, and those oppressed by demons, and those having seizures, and paralytics, and he healed them. I would like to put a big square around the words he healed them there in chapter 4, and cross-reference yourself over to chapter 8 and 9, because that is where we see the healings, and that is our main focus. The joy, the rejuvenation that is brought to people as a result of Jesus going to them, ministering to them, and being willing to heal them. So chapter 4 already taught us it was the fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 9. I want to remind us that in chapter 9, the individual that would come to provide this healing, this rejoicing, this period of time for Galilee, chapter 9 in Isaiah gives him some very awesome titles. The titles are that he would be born of a woman, a child would be born, that he would be called a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. This person of Isaiah 9 that would come would also be the king that would sit on David's throne, and it said that he would govern his people in a time of complete peace. That's an interesting statement because in Isaiah 8 and 9, there is a big war that is about to come on the area of Galilee. But in Isaiah 9, Isaiah is promising, I'm going to send a person born of a woman, and he will become your new king, and he will lead you through times of peace. He said that his kingdom would be transcendent. That was the prophetic verse that starts us on this journey with Jesus in Galilee. What I'd like for you to watch for today, the one sermon topic, what is the blessing in each of Jesus' miracles? When Jesus performs a miracle, what is the change in state for the person that received the healing? That's going to be our takeaway. So let's look at our chapter, Matthew chapter 8. I'm going to start in the middle. We're going to start with the second miracle, the centurion whose servant was healed. I want to start with that one instead of the leper, guys. So jump down to verse 5. We're going to start with the second miracle here. So when he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home and suffering terribly." And Jesus said to him, "I'll come and heal him." I'd put a little square around the words "heal him" because that's our whole focus. The healing that Jesus brings to Galilee, the joy and the rejoicing that comes to this once dark and gloomy area. I want to start out with the individual that Jesus is dealing with here, a Roman centurion. Does that strike you as odd at all? The one thing that the Jews had always wanted throughout thousands of years is the Jews have always suffered oppression. There was only a brief period, I believe, I'm going to state it wrong, after Antiochus Epiphanes, I think that was 165 BC. There was a period of time where the Zealots overthrew Antiochus, and the Jews enjoyed being in Jerusalem and being their own boss for a short period of time. I want to tell you how long it was, but I'll be wrong if I quote it. So the Jews enjoyed being what we call autonomous. They ruled themselves for a short period of time. But all of the years before that and all of the years since then, the Jewish nation over in Jerusalem have not been autonomous. There have always been other powers that have come in and been the boss of the Jews, and they hate that, and they're waiting for a time when the Messiah will come, be their king, and give them complete freedom. Well, in this time that we're reading, the Romans were the ones that were oppressing Jerusalem. The Romans were the world power in charge. Jerusalem and the Jews were not free to do whatever they wanted, but they were able to govern themselves as long as they did exactly what Rome wanted them to do. So the person that the Jew hated the most was Romans, and especially Roman soldiers, because you guys have no right to be the boss of us. And yet in our healing here, it is exactly a Roman soldier, a Roman centurion. It's exactly the enemy that's coming to Jesus. And Jesus shows that he lives out his own Sermon on the Mount, because in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Love those who persecute you. Pray for those who persecute you. Love even your enemy." And so Jesus sets that up as the expectation. And here, the person who is oppressing the Jewish nation comes to Jesus and wants a miracle. And Jesus says, "I'll be more than happy to bless you with a miracle." He comes and he says that there is a servant who is both paralyzed and suffering. I would highlight those two words or do something to make yourself ponder those words for a minute. Now, the first word I want to draw your attention to is the word servant. The word servant in the Greek here could be a slave or it could be somebody's child. So here in this example, this could be the centurion's son or this could be a centurion's servant. The word can mean either one, young child, son, or servant. So he might be asking to heal his son, he might be asking to heal his servant, but I would sure take a moment and look at those words, paralyzed and suffering. Many of us are old enough to realize that life can be very cruel. Life can be very cruel. Mom and I have been watching several very picturesque, beautiful documentaries on like a National Geographic type of thing. Beautiful scenery, beautiful animals. It's amazing how they can get all these close-up of these animals, but you can't watch those animal documentaries very long before what happens. You see a lion take down a zebra. You see somebody trying to get away and breaking a leg. You see an animal getting stuck in something and wiggling themselves free and creating a big bloody gash on their leg. it doesn't take us long to realize life can be cruel. It can do difficult things it can bring difficulties on us that we wish we didn't have to deal with. And that's what I'm mindful here as a person who's paralyzed and suffering terribly. I almost want to reflect for a minute one way that I can relate to this. What happens to us is if we experience difficulties, if we experience injuries, if we experience illness and disease, it sort of begins to limit what we can do with our life. We don't get to do the things that used to be normal in our life. All of a sudden, we're not at that same place where we once were. We're in a new place, and we really don't like the fact that we've had to lose some freedoms. My dad, when he was 55, and I'm mindful of that because I'm 52, or maybe 53, and so within a couple years of my own age, my dad had a welding accident, burnt his eyes, and lost his eyesight, and became legally blind. I didn't realize it at the time, right? At the moment, you're doing whatever you have to do. But now as I reflect back, my dad lost his license. He couldn't drive anymore. My dad kind of had to ask family members. I remember him asking me and my sister, would you mind taking me somewhere? You know the freedom that you lose when you can't drive yourself somewhere. And so I can remember, wow, those must have been very difficult times. Now, my father never complained. I never knew it was difficult. He always managed. Wow, thanks, Nikki. Do I sound hoarse? My dad was a wonderful father. He never complained. We never knew he was suffering. But now as an adult, I can look back and I can realize, wow, his injury caused him to lose a lot of freedom. It must have caused a lot of discomfort. And so I look at this and I'm amazed. The blessing of a miracle. What could happen, how a miracle could completely change somebody's life, and how a miracle could restore somebody back to their previous glory, back to the days when they were unrestricted, not in the gloom. How beautiful a miracle could be to a person. From paralyzed and suffering back to when his times were good and rejoicing. Let's continue on in verse 8. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority. I have soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes. I tell another one to come, and he comes. And I tell my servant, do this, and he does it. I want to pause right there because that scripture has had a profound effect in my life. The centurion realized, I also am a man under authority, meaning I have power because somebody above me has given me power. That's what it means to be under authority. I have power because somebody gave me power. And what he recognizes in Jesus, he must have witnessed Jesus. And seeing Jesus, he says, I recognize that you also, Jesus, are under authority. Now that might seem kind of weird because we kind of picture Jesus as the boss. But what he means is, Jesus, you have power, you have authority because somebody gave you power and authority. We know that power and authority came from God, but it was amazing that this soldier recognized it in this civilian, this Nazarene. There is something awesome about you. So I have a request to be made about you. The other aspect of authority is the soldier said, I understand authority. And that means if I am a boss of some kind, It is expected that my subordinates, that the people under me, do what I tell them to do. It's also expected that when my boss tells me something, I do whatever my boss tells me to do. I can't express to you guys how profound that was for me as a child, as a I don't know, child, maybe a high schooler. That served so powerfully for me because it validated or it corroborated my own disposition. And what I mean by my own disposition is because my mother and father's training, it was easy for me to recognize my place. I was under my mother and father's authority. I had no problem with that. And so whatever you guys say is exactly the way it's going to be. I've heard that some teens have a much tougher time with authority than I did. By God's grace, I loved it. I loved understanding authority. I loved knowing that I do what my parents tell me to do. In school, the teacher is my authority, and so I respect my teacher's authority. In the job world, my boss is my authority, and so I respect my boss's authority. And interesting enough, do you know what eventually happened? One day I was made a boss. And so now I have to learn something new. I have to learn that the people that are under me also need to have a respect for authority. They need to understand how authority works. So I loved this because it helped me feel like I know exactly what to do in life. When someone has authority over me, I submit myself to that authority. When I am authority, it is proper. The way it's supposed to work is those under you should submit to your authority. And this soldier corroborated what I always knew to be true in my life. That is exactly how authority works. Most importantly, Jesus recognized, the centurion recognized that Jesus had authority. So, one time in this, we were in a Sunday school and the teacher asked all of us to prepare one of our favorite Bible verses to share the following week. And so that following week, I shared this Bible verse. I'm a man under authority. This is how it works. I tell him to do this, he does it. I tell him no, and he doesn't. And I say, do this, and he does it. I understand authority. And that was my favorite Bible verse at the time. And I remember that Bible teacher gave me a look like she didn't understand why I would like that verse. I was so perplexed in Bible class, I thought I had a good grip on this verse, especially later in the verse when Jesus says, wow, I have not seen such a great faith in all of Israel. Wow, he was so impressed by this centurion's understanding of the concept of authority. And I'll tell you, it was hurtful to me that this Sunday school teacher couldn't understand why I liked that verse. If we fast forward to today, I think that the church's character is to understand this verse. Children's character should be to understand this verse. But do we recognize, I'm just going off script here a little bit, but don't we recognize that now we're living in a world where nobody wants to be told what to do? The employment situation in America is difficult because no employee wants to submit themselves to their authorities. The biggest thing is everybody's gotten used to working from home. So now when a boss says, I want you in the office from 9 to 5, 5 days a week, there are actually people that feel like that is an injustice. People are offended by that. And I get concerned because if the church embraces this concept of authority and submission, we please God in that. But aren't we living in a world where that is the opposite? Young people walk by old people and have no regard for them whatsoever. One of the things, again, I'm still off script, but Margaret Sanger, Has anybody ever heard that name? Margaret Sanger, my understanding, she's the one that founded Planned Parenthood. She's the one that hard-pressed for abortions. And I think she probably started what we call women's liberation movement. And there may have been, I don't know the story, guys, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but way back in the day, there may have been good cause for women to want a better place in society, to be recognized, to be treated fairly, something along those lines. But if we fast forward all the way to today, I think we would agree that whatever Margaret Sanger started has only resulted today in the decay of society. She wrote a book that said, "No gods and no masters." That was her book, and you can tell her attitude, I don't want any bosses. I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I don't want any gods, and I don't want any masters. Isn't that why Blue Eyes wrote the song, "I Did It My Way"? You know, I just wanted to make a comment about that. But here is a story about authority. This centurion had a respect for authority, and because he understood and respected authority, he was going to get his miracle. Let me take you down to verse 10. Now, when Jesus heard this, he marveled, and he said to those who followed him, "Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith." That's probably why this is my favorite verse, is because I sense that Jesus was very pleased with the centurion, which means I know how to please Jesus if I follow the centurion's example. Verse 11, "I tell you the truth, many will come from the east and the west, and they will recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." Verse 12, "While the sons of the kingdom," that's the Jews, "the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Do you get the impact of what Jesus has just said? You, a Roman centurion, the enemy in the eyes of the Jews, you, because you understood authority and because you put your faith in me, you are going to be the one that enters the kingdom of heaven. All kinds of people from the east and all kinds of people from the west that are like this centurion, they're going to be the ones coming and entering the kingdom of heaven. But, he says, the sons of the kingdom, those people who were predestined for the kingdom of heaven, the Jews, my elect, my chosen, you guys are going to get kicked out of the kingdom because you have no respect for authority, because you have no faith in me. That is a mind-blowing, earth-shattering, generation-changing statement. Your faith, the faith of an enemy Roman, is more important than the nationality of an Israelite. Your faith is more important than your nationality. And these people will be thrown into outer darkness. And I think that's interesting because Jesus is bringing people from darkness and gloom, the state that they were in, healing them, bringing them into a time of rejoicing and light. That's what Jesus does. Brings us into times of rejoicing, joy, and light. But he says, but there are going to be these people that because they don't have the faith, they're going to be kicked out. And they're going to be sent to darkness and gloom where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's this interesting exchange happening in Jesus' words. I talked about authority. I love that little section. Let me just say, I had I had a rude awakening when I became a manager. I was managing 12 technicians. Now, I was a good employee because I understood authority and I obeyed my authorities. I was a good employee. But now that I was a boss, I assumed that I would have a bunch of good employees. Out of 12 technicians, there might have been one guy that understood authority and did his best. 9 people that didn't give a hoot. So that not everybody believes the concept of authority, but the church should be marked. Us being in the kingdom of heaven, we should be marked by understanding those who are in authority over us and those who are in submission to us. And the Bible goes on about that. I want to talk now about faith. That was authority. Faith. I have not seen such great faith in all of Israel, Jesus says. I want to take a moment and tackle faith and really give you a good understanding of faith before you walk out of here. If this is the one thing you take away, the world is convinced that a Christian's faith is just some illusion or a delusion of hoping that there's something better. I want to explain to you today what faith really is so that we understand that we're not just guessing and hoping, crossing our fingers that something is better. Faith is something that is substantial and explainable. Let me give you a couple examples to get the gears turning. Atheists will mock your faith because they say Christians invent God because it makes them feel better. Let me give my first example. Jesus and the Tooth Fairy. At one time, as children, we believed in both. Amen? Okay. At one time, we believed in both Jesus and the Tooth Fairy. And for a little while in life, both of those kept getting corroborated or reaffirmed, right? You put one tooth under the pillow, you got money. A year later, you put another tooth under the pillow, you got money again. But then all of a sudden you reach an age and the Tooth Fairy quits showing up. But all of your Christian faith, all of your growth and knowledge about God keeps growing. Little things keep happening, so your faith in one thing keeps growing, keeps becoming stronger, because throughout your life, more and more experiences have shown me that this is for real. Whereas with the Tooth Fairy, there was a couple things that made me feel like it was for real, but after I got to a certain age, more and more experiences helped me realize, oh, this is not real. So faith, remember Jesus and the Tooth Fairy, faith is something very real, and as the years go by, our faith gets stronger and stronger and stronger because we see more and more proof that what we base our hope in is the truth. When something gets repeated over and over and over throughout your lifetime, that is where your faith comes from. Let me give you another example. When you go out in the morning and you take the key out of your car, you don't realize this, but you have absolute faith that when you turn the key, the car is going to turn on. That's what faith is. You have faith that your car is going to start. Why do you have that faith? Is it just some abstract pie in the sky hope that this thing is going to work today? No. It's years of driving your Xterra or your Subaru, years of going out there and turning the key and that thing starting. All of those years have built up, and because they have repeated so many times, that is where your faith comes from. Now you go start your car, you don't even think about it, you don't even worry about it, because you've got faith that it's going to start. Getting on an airplane. Some people won't get on an airplane. Why? There's no faith. And that can be understandable, but I have been on airplanes since I was a little kid. I've probably flown, I guess I would say dozens, maybe even 100 times. I've flown so many times. Being in an airplane and arriving somewhere safely has happened so many times that I have no problem getting on an airplane. Now, someday, is it guaranteed that you're going to get there safe? It's not a guarantee. You can't prove that I'm going to get there safe. But faith says, faith is, but I've done this so many times, I can't prove that I'm going to get there safe, but I've done it so many times, my faith has been built up to a point that I have faith that I'm going to get there safely this time. Those of you that have ever asked somebody about finding a dentist, asked somebody about finding a handyman, when people recommend someone to you, it's because what? Because they have faith in that person. When they recommend a dentist, they have faith in that person. Why do they have faith? Because they've had repeated experiences that have always proved beneficial. So based on my repeated experiences, I have faith that my dentist will do a good job. Again, you can't prove he's going to do a good job, but I have faith that he will do a good job. As we grow, we have multiple experiences of God working. We see people flip and be absolutely transformed by their faith. We get more faith because we witness other people's faith. We get excited when we see someone else's biblical knowledge. We get encouraged and excited. We get faith from that. We get faith when we have fellowship with other people who share our faith. We build on that. Sometimes we may see the answer to prayers. Sometimes we may witness miracle. If you've ever gone on a mission, it will change your life. And so it is a lifetime of tiny experiences that keep repeating themselves that eventually create this faith. And Jesus said, wow, I have not seen such great faith. The Gospels are recorded for this reason. Matthew has recorded everything to build our faith in Jesus as the Messiah. But John in his Gospel, John chapter 20 and verse 30, John actually says, the reason I'm writing all these miracles is so that you can believe that Jesus really is the Son of God. So our faith grows by reading the Scripture. Let me show you this. John chapter 20 and verse 30. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of His disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you can believe that Jesus is the Christ. Christ means Messiah. I'm writing this stuff down to build your faith in Jesus, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in His name. Faith is something, and let me give you one last explanation on faith. Faith is something that doesn't empower you, it empowers the object that you have faith in. For example, if you're sitting home, now there are some people that live at home that have a car in the garage, but they don't have the confidence or the faith or the ability to drive that car. So there's a person that can have a vehicle that can be a blessing, but without your confidence or faith in that vehicle, the person may just become a shut-in, right? Can you picture that? Right outside in your garage, you have got a miracle that can take you everywhere and empower you like nobody's business. One of the greatest inventions. But if a person is timid, if they don't have the faith to rely on that car, then that car can never work power in that person. If you get that idea. So it's our faith in Jesus that our faith and our boldness. We're talking about growing the church. We're talking about ministering to our community. We're talking about bringing one soul to Christ. And if we read the Scriptures and have faith in the one that will attract people, That kind of faith will empower us to let Jesus do His work. But without faith, wouldn't it be terrible if we just keep Jesus in the garage and we don't ever step out? We don't ever become excited and ambitious because the power, we just don't have enough faith in it. All right. Reading on to verse 13 in Matthew. Matthew 8 and verse 13. And to the centurion, Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed. Put a square around that. That's our theme. The servant was healed that very moment. What a beautiful result of one man's faith. Let's go back now to verse 2 and let's pick up the miracle of Jesus healing the leper. Verse 2, "Behold, the leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, 'Lord, if you will, you can make me clean.' And Jesus stretched out His hand and touched him, saying, 'I will, so be cleaned.' And immediately his leprosy was cleansed." I'd put a square around that, was cleansed. This is what Jesus is in the business of, healing and cleansing. Verse 4, "And Jesus said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a proof to them.'" I want to take a moment to talk about leprosy. Let me just read what somebody else wrote about it because they know better than I do. Here's a quote from William Barclay. "No other disease reduces a human being for so many years to such a hideous wreck. It might begin with little nodules which go on to ulcerate, and the ulcers develop a foul discharge, and the eyebrows fall out, and the eyes become staring, the vocal cords become ulcerated. The voice becomes hoarse, and the breath begins to wheeze. Slowly, the sufferer becomes a mass of ulcerated growths. The average course of that kind of leprosy is 9 years, and it ends with mental decay, coma, and ultimately death." And if we can imagine someone in that state, and he says, "But Jesus, I know that you have power. Jesus, I know that if you want to, you can fix this." And Jesus says, "Yes, I do want to." And he's healed. Let me show you what the law mandated of someone who contracted leprosy. I'm going to take you back to Leviticus chapter 13 and verse 45. Here's what happened if you were to get leprosy. "The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes, let the hair of his head hang loose, and he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' Verse 46, "And he shall remain unclean as long as he has that disease. He is unclean. And he shall live alone, and his dwelling will be outside of the camp." And boy, not just the pain of the disease, but the judgment of falling under a condemnation. You are unclean. You can no longer hang out with us. You can no longer hang out with your spouse. You can no longer be around your children. You are something outcast. You are something unclean. Leave the city walls. Go live outside somewhere. And if you see anybody, cover your face and say, "I'm unclean. Get away from me. I'm unclean. Get away from me." Can you imagine being separated like that from society? Well, the other thing that Jesus says is as soon as he's healed, he commands the man, "Now you need to go do something. You need to go do something. You need to go do what the law of Moses commanded you to do when you get healed of leprosy. So the leper goes and he has to do what Moses commanded. I'd like for you to understand this. Some of the things, we're going to turn to Leviticus chapter 14. Chapter 13 and 14 in Leviticus is about leprosy. One of the things you had to do is first you had to wash yourself. Next, you had to shave off all your hair. You had to shave off your eyebrows. You had to shave off your mustache and your beard, your facial hair, your armpit hair. You had to shave your entire body of all the hair. You had to go get fresh clothes. Let me just, as a side note, guys, doesn't that sound like what happens when we're baptized? You wash your body. You were unclean first. You get washed in the baptism. You get new clothes. The new clothes of a believer is your righteous deeds. When you are doing your righteousness, those are your new clothes. I think that's amazing. And then you had to offer sacrifices. You had to offer, depending if you were poor or what you could afford, two things. One of the things gets killed. One of the things gets set free. And isn't that a beautiful picture of the old you? The leprous man is what has died and is gone. The new you, the healed you, is the bird that gets set free and you're free to fly again. Go back and return to society. Now you're included again. You who were once unclean, now you have been made clean. So go to the priests. And here I wanted to read you a piece of this. Leviticus 14 and verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leprous person for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look. Then if the case of leprous disease is healed in the leprous person, then the priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds and cedar wood and scarlet yarn and hyssop." Jumping down to verse 7. "Take some of the blood, and he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. And then he shall be pronounced clean." I would put a square around those words. "He shall be pronounced clean and shall let the living bird go into the open field." What Jesus is doing in His miracles is He's setting people free. He's returning people back to their pre-disease state when they enjoyed their family, when they enjoyed their health, when they had joy and happiness. Jesus is restoring people who have fallen into darkness, uncleanliness. He's restoring them back to being clean and restoring them back into society. I can't help but feel that there's a big metaphor in that for us. Can you imagine them saying, "You are pronounced clean now. You are no longer unclean. Come back into the society and enjoy your people." So the sermon topic, what is the blessing of each miracle? The blessing of each miracle is people are being moved from darkness to gloom, from darkness and gloom to rejoicing and celebration. People are being reincorporated back into life before Satan inflicted his evil upon them. And really, eschatologically, Jesus was binding Satan. That's the bigger view. Satan is the one that brings disease, illness, uncleanliness, and death. Jesus is showing up saying, "I have power over Satan. I can undo any of the damage that Satan has done." Coming back down to verse 16, we're going to finish up our text here. Verse 16, "And that evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out all the spirits with a word, and he healed all who were sick," restoring people back to their life before the evil that Satan had inflicted on them. I can't help but feel like there's a metaphor in all of that, guys. Jesus, while He was on earth, had a physical ministry where He physically healed people. And we believe, don't ever believe that I can lay hands on you and heal you. In fact, don't believe that there's any other preacher that can lay hands and heal people. But we do believe that God can heal, don't we? If we didn't believe that, we wouldn't pray that He heals people. When there are people that we're concerned about, we have absolute faith that God can do miracles, that God can do whatever He wants, but we temper that with Jesus' words. Father, this is what I want. This is what I would like. But Jesus said, nevertheless, Father, your will be done. Father, I recognize authority, and I recognize you're the boss, God, so I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to ask you of something I would like you to do, but I understand that you are the authority, and whatever you decide, God, is going to be okay with me. But I believe that you have the power to do anything that I ask you to do. Jesus healed a physical ministry, but after Jesus' resurrection, what we're going to witness is a spiritual healing. Spiritually, everybody on earth has been locked up, bound up under sin. Everybody on earth, it says, has been in darkness and in gloom. And spiritually, when someone comes to faith in Christ, the Scripture says they have been translated from darkness into the kingdom of light. I think it's really neat how Jesus does it in a physical way, but we also are going to see Jesus doing that in a spiritual way for those that are lost, becoming those that are saved. I hope that's been a blessing to you guys. We love our Lord. We're grateful to Him for His patience and mercy and for His healing and His sovereignty and His omnipotence in our life.